Now, in order to judge the contemporary developments in Western society rightly, and in order to think God's thoughts after Him, and in order to live obediently and holily as citizens of the city of God, in opposition to our rebellious and depraved culture, we will do well to learn or remind ourselves, as the case may be, of the Christian and Reformed world and life view, or as it is more popularly called today, the Christian and Reformed worldview. With this, we begin our conference proper. And why we begin with this topic will, I trust, become evident. I readily acknowledge that the phrase world and life view, or the term worldview, is not found in the Bible. I readily acknowledge also that the term worldview might seem philosophical and even intimidating to the believer. Nevertheless, the reality expressed by the term worldview is biblical, and the reality of worldview is important to every Christian. One's worldview, and everyone has a worldview, whether he's familiar with that term or not. One's worldview is exactly that. His overall view of the world. His view of the creation. His view of the history of peoples and nations in the creation. And his view of his own place in that creation and history. Basic to one's worldview is his belief concerning the origin of the world, including himself. Basic also is his conviction concerning the meaning of the world and its history, including his own life. And basic to one's worldview is his understanding of the purpose of the world and history, including the purpose of his own existence. Worldview is the big picture within which each one of us locates his or her own small place, and according to which big picture we determine what is a wise, right, and worthwhile life to live. It ought to be immediately evident how important worldview is for one's own life and behavior. Suppose that the worldview of a young man or a young woman, this is the worldview that is being framed in all the young people who attend the state or public schools today. Suppose that the worldview of a young man or of a young woman is that of atheistic, naturalistic, evolutionary science. Atheistic means the denial that there is a God. Naturalistic simply means that this earth and its life are all there is. And evolutionary, of course, refers to that theory about origins that derives all things from some very small beginning through natural development over billions of years. Suppose that thinking forms the worldview of a young person. There is no God. Everything came into being by blind chance. Man, and therefore the young person himself or herself is the accidental product of the biological development of primates who happen to be fitter than others. The end of every human being is death and decay. The end of the universe will either be a stupendous explosion or implosion or the cooling down, but eventual destruction in any case. The life of the young person, therefore, is meaningless, without hope. With such a worldview, how will these young people live and behave themselves? Some will choose a life of irresponsibility and pleasure madness, drunkenness, drugs, sexual indulgence. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Others, more nobly apparently, will devote themselves to their own fame and fortune, to making a name that will endure for a little while after they perish. Others will kill themselves. And there are many young people who are committing suicide today as the direct result of the worldview that I have just described. If, on the other hand, the worldview of a young person is that the God and Father of Jesus Christ made all things, that He Himself has been created by God and redeemed by the Lord Jesus Christ, that there is a purpose of His life, the glory of God, and that His end will be everlasting life in a new world. That's the worldview of the covenant and Christian young man or young woman. That young person will fear God and keep His commandments. In the words of Ecclesiastes 12, verse 12. The Bible may not use the term worldview, but it certainly constructs a worldview. And it forms this worldview in every believing mind. My parents, one of whom got as far only as the 8th grade before his father set him to work on the farm, and the other of which was only able by the circumstances of her life to finish the 11th grade, my parents never used the term worldview. Very likely, if I would have used that term in their presence, they would have been suspicious of the word as just another notion of a college that was abandoning its reformed moorings. But my parents, as reformed believers, had a worldview. And they passed that worldview on to me and to my brothers and sisters. And it is still being passed on to their grandchildren, and we trust their great-grandchildren. In the booklet entitled The Reformed Worldview on Behalf of a Godly Culture, I define worldview this way: a comprehensive, unified view of all creation and history in light either of the knowledge of the triune, one true and living God revealed in Jesus Christ, or in light of the unbelieving rejection of this God. This view of all things determines how one lives the whole of his or her earthly life in the world. The power of worldview is that it frames one's entire life. That's my definition. What is the Christian worldview, which is also the Reformed or Calvinistic worldview? The Christian worldview is as rich as all creation, and it is as mysterious and full of wonder as all of history and all of one's own personal life. The Christian worldview is simply the view of creation as made by the triune God and Father of Jesus Christ for the purpose of His own glory in Jesus Christ and Jesus' church. This purpose, with all things, God realizes by governing history by His providential power unto the goal of the bodily coming of Jesus Christ at the end of the ages, to raise the dead, both the elect believers and the reprobate unbelievers, the elect believers unto life and the reprobate unbelievers unto everlasting death.